This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Hear me? Is it working? Okay, are you ready in the back? All right. Welcome to the 4th annual Outstanding Women in Medicine program. Many of you may recall this has been called Women First in the past. We changed the name to kind of broaden the scope a little bit, but we are still, as initially planned, recognizing outstanding women in the field of medicine. This is part of the larger University Women History Month program. And so our intent in this program is to bring outstanding women to the front, to honor them, and to hear their journeys as women in their field. And we try to bring you a diverse range of fields and experiences so that we can all learn and ask questions. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jeannette Guarner. She was brought up in Mexico, where she obtained her medical degree from La Salle University. She did her residency and surgical pathology fellowship here at Emory. And after residency, she returned to Mexico City, where she was the director of the clinical laboratory at the National Cancer Institute. In 1997, she returned to Atlanta to work at the CDC in infectious disease pathology. During her 10-year tenure at CDC, she was involved in the histopathologic study of high-profile outbreaks, including the U.S. anthrax bioterrorism attack, the introduction of the West Nile virus to the Americas, and the discovery of the SARS Coronavirus. In 2007, she joined the faculty at Emory, and she is currently professor of pathology and laboratory medicine, and as of next week, she'll be the director of clinical laboratories at Emory University Hospital at Midtown. And she has over 150 publications in peer-reviewed journals. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeannette. Thank you.
Well, I have pictures. Oh. I'm a morphologist, and as a morphologist, I guess Pat is also a morphologist. We're both morphologists. Oh, there it is. So as a morphologist, I like a lot of pictures. So I have it's not a very big presentation, but I have lots of pictures. So I want to show a little bit of a timeline because since I've moved back and forth between one place and the other, people need to understand that I've been across the border many, many times, and not just for visiting my family, but to work and to study and to do a variety of different things. I was born in the States, in Seattle. When I was very, very young, and probably that was the only illegal crossing I made, because I didn't have a passport, whether it was a Mexican or an American passport at that point in time. My parents took me to Mexico, and that's where I was brought up. I did my elementary school there, my high school, I did medical school there, and then I came for a little bit of time to the US for a year, and then went back to Mexico, and then came back to Emory, spent my residency training and fellowship here, and then I went back to Mexico and worked at the Instituto Nacional de Cancerología in Mexico City. Then when we came back to the US, we came to Atlanta. I started at CDC, and then I was recently, in comparison to Pat, definitely, much more recently at Emory. I started first in 2007 at CHOA, and then moved to Emory Hospital. So, and that's where I am currently at Emory Hospital. But I'm going to start my story from a little further back, meaning I'm going to talk a little bit about my father. I'm going to talk a little bit about my mother. My father is a psychiatrist, but he is a collector at heart. He's always collected everything that crosses his path. And he was born in Barcelona, and during the Civil War, my grandfather was in the wrong side of the war, so he ended up, they had to get out of Spain. They ended up in Morocco. In Morocco, my father, I don't know if my father or my grandfather, but one of them, I assume it was more my grandfather because my father was a young kid. But everybody says that my father was the one that won the lottery ticket. So he won the lottery in Morocco. And one of the things that my grandfather said, well, is you cannot just spend the money in candy. Let's get something that's a little more durable. And that's when he started his stamp collection. And that stamp collection traveled with him when they had to flee again, Morocco, and ended up in Mexico. And that book with stamps basically was money in the bank, because stamps are a collection that is, there's a lot of money put into them. And my father, unbeknownst to him, was training a pathologist when he kept on giving us the book and the stamps. And we had to find the stamp, because just like the booklet is here, this is how the stamp collection books look like. They have this black and white pictures. You can see the American flag here. And then they say some are green, some are blue, some are whatever. And then they say the year and different characteristics that you have to note in the stamps with different watermarks. And you have to basically be doing a lot of morphology. You're doing the morphology on the stamp, and you're putting it in the album. So he basically, unbeknownst to him, a psychiatrist, or a psychoanalyst, because he later became a psychoanalyst, was training a pathologist by doing this. My mother, on the other hand, she was born in Mexico. Both her parents are Germans. And she liked a lot to do a lot of things at home. And she embroidered, she knit, she did a lot of different things. I put that tablecloth that's there is the second tablecloth that I made. I made it when I was about 12 years old. I did that one. And why did I put it in there? Because when you, and this is another lesson in my life that my mother taught me, is when you're doing a project like this, it's a big project for a 12-year-old to do something like this. So you have to plan. You have to gather all your information on, the size of the tablecloth. You have to gather the information of the colors you want, how big these things are going to look, and, so on and so forth. And you do a little bit at a time, okay? You don't plan to do this in one sitting, okay? You can't do this in one sitting. You have to do maybe this corner first, and maybe, this will take you 2 weeks or 3 weeks to do, and then the next corner, and then the next corner, and so on and so forth. So you start building this project a little bit at a time. And another thing that is important when you're building the project, maybe the first corner doesn't come out that great, but it's a pain in the butt to really undo it when you're embroidering. So you basically finish one and go to the next, and finish the next and go to the next. And I think that's a very important advice that I got, or my mother, without unbeknownst to me, gave me, because that's the way I feel about writing papers. I've written a lot of papers, and one of the things that I always do is you gather all your information, and you do a little bit at a time. You don't try to write a whole paper in one afternoon, because at least I won't be able to do it. I don't think there may be people that can do it, but I can't do it. So I always put myself little small goals, and I say, well, today or this week, I'm going to do the first paragraph of the introduction, then the second paragraph of the introduction. Tomorrow, I'll do, so on and so forth. And I really don't look back at the introduction or the methods until I finish the paper. Because if I start correcting my first paragraph of the introduction, I could spend maybe, you want 1 month, 2 months, 3 months correcting it. I can always correct my papers many, many times. But it's better to correct them after you're done with the whole thing, because then you already have the final product. And so it's easier to think about the final product once you have the final product. And then you can do the corrections as you go along. And the same thing happened when I was dancing. I started dancing when I was 8 years old. And here, it's my first troupe. I was in the junior ensemble at that time. Must have been around 11 or 12 years old, too. And again, it's the same concept when you're putting a performance. You put, maybe the teacher or the choreographer knows the entire dance, how it's going to work. But in reality, you do it one little bit at a time. You don't put the entire thing on one sitting. You do one part and then the next, and then you clean up. So I think that those are important things that I learned, both from my mother and from my troop. So do a bit at a time. Don't look back until you're done. Okay. I am an avid reader, and I read in every language that you give me. I read, obviously, Spanish, English. I read in French, too, not as much as the other two. But I like to read also everything. I like to read history. I like to read novels. I like to read poetry. Now, one of the things that my father gave me when I was relatively young, I must have been about 15 years old, is that book that says Microbe Hunters. And obviously, I took it to heart. That book tells you about the story about Pasteur and Jenner and Koch. And I think eventually I became a microbe hunter. I went to medical school at La Salle, as Rochelle did. And that's where I met my husband, Carlos. A lot of people know him. And the school didn't look as nice as it looks nowadays, but that's where the school is located. And I had, obviously, influenced by the two morphologists in the school. The first one, the one that's at the top, the photograph, is Mariano Ramirez de Gollado. He was my histology teacher. I couldn't find my pathology teacher. I basically subbed, or not subbed, I helped both in the labs in histology and anatomic pathology at the time. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was already, I guess, the stamp collection had stamped me for life. So I liked the idea of looking at morphology. Then I came here as a medical student. And there were, I rotated to several people. Obviously, there's some people that everybody knows, Ken and Dr. Hurst. Nanette, who's been one of the honorees. I still remember being in the cardiology service at Grady and thinking, oh my God, this woman knows so much. She's amazing. You know, she would teach all these things, and I would just listen to her, and to think that right now I am, you know, following her footsteps is just, I don't think I'll ever be able to do that. But she was one of my attendings when I was at Grady in the cardiology floor. And David Rimland, who's the infectious disease guy that I did one of the subs, also did a pathology rotation and a hematology rotation, obviously to morphologists, and as a medical student, who doesn't get wowed by Dr. Sewell. So then we went back to Mexico, and there in Mexico you do 5 years of medical school. And then you have to do 1 year of what they call social service, where basically it's a payback of what you're doing. I ended up doing it at the Instituto Nacional de Nutrición, for short, Ciencias Médicas y Nutrición. And I did it in pathology. This is the guy that was my mentor during that year. He's a great pathologist. I really have no words, because it was really a lot of fun to work with him, spend time in the electron microscope, do a variety of different things. And interestingly enough, that's the first time I published anything that had to do with medicine. It was something, we did a series on chronic ulcerative colitis, the pathology, and we published it in one of the Mexican journals of pathology. Since then, I just can't let the microscope go. And I have my stamp collection on microscopes here. Then I came here to do my pathology training. There's a lot of people here that you know. I see Melinda is around here. I published with George Birdsong. We published an article. Obviously, people know Madge and know Cynthia Cohen, and Beth Unger is now at CDC. There's two people that are missing that were my mentors, Etienne Sommeren, who I've seen recently. She lives part of the year here, and she's, you know, I see her once in a while. And the other person that was extremely, he gave me something that I never thought at the time was going to be that important, but ended up being extremely important in my life. Dr. Rex Kahn was the laboratory director here at Emory, but he was also the residency training director at the time. And when I came from Mexico, I said, I just want to do anatomic pathology because I'm going back to Mexico, so might as well just do the thing that pathologists are known there. I don't really need to do all this lab medicine stuff. And he says, well, I understand that, but it'll give you a good breadth of understanding, and you'll do get better if you do 1 year or 6 months of lab medicine. I said, okay, well, a year is no big deal. Let's do 1 year. And so I ended up doing the entire, both anatomic pathology and clinical pathology residency training, 2 years of each. And unbeknownst to me, because when I went back to Mexico, what I was going to do was anatomic pathology, and I actually got boarded in Mexico and in the U.S. And in the U.S., I got boarded with both anatomic and clinical pathology. But in Mexico, I took a trip and got boarded in anatomic pathology. Clinical pathology there was no board in clinical pathology. But I went to Mexico to do anatomic pathology, and you'll see what happens next. So in the meantime, this woman here, one of my fellow residents, Anne Early, used to say, we all need a wife. And I think this is something that at the time, I thought she was a little crazy, but I thought it was great. Because what she wanted to have as a wife is she wanted to have somebody that would have the dinner ready for her and her husband when she came back from work. And I thought, okay, that's an interesting thought process. But I think I've changed my way of needing a wife. And I think I changed my way of needing a wife because I think, to me, what a wife is somebody that is helpful to you with your kids, and it's helpful to you at home. And I think to be able to be a woman with kids, having a wife that can help you with things at home, especially I don't like washing toilets. I can do the dinner, but washing toilets is not my expertise. Well, I may be very good, but I don't like doing it. So I'd rather have somebody else do that. So I think for all the young women that are having children, think about the things that you don't like doing at home and get a wife to do those things. That's something that I would counsel everybody to do. Now, we were doing residency training when AIDS was basically discovered, and that's where my hunt for microbes started, I guess. We did a lot of autopsies without knowing that they had AIDS. We were hunting pneumocystis pneumonia. We were hunting a bunch of different things. And we were the first ones sort of describing the epidemic as it was happening. And it gave me a lot of opportunity. And at that time, we were working, Carlos in medicine, and I was in pathology. But it gave us the opportunity to explore a lot of these two things. And Carlos and I published several papers working on both Epstein-Barr virus and lymphomas in patients with AIDS, and then tuberculosis in patients with AIDS and how much it had increased at Grady because of AIDS. So we did a lot of things regarding this epidemic. Actually, after finishing my residency training and fellowship, I had published already 14 papers. And again, do a little at a time. Eventually, you'll get it all done. Then we went back to Mexico, and I started doing anatomic pathology in Mexico. And I started working with this guy, Alejandro Moar. He was the subdirector, or I guess that's I'm not sure how you translate, of research in the Instituto Nacional de Cancerología. That's where I landed. And he was the director. Dr. Beltran was the director of the hospital. And I started in anatomic pathology. And we actually, with Alejandro, we got an R01 grant with people at Stanford looking at Helicobacter pylori and cancer in the Chiapanecan region in down south of in the border with Guatemala. That's where we were working. But then all of a sudden, the woman that was in charge of the clinical laboratory retired, and then reason that I don't understand, because I wasn't involved in the negotiations, the instruments that they got to run their chemistries came with computer systems. And the computer system that they came with was a computer system that could get hooked up to other instrumentations. And so it was basically a laboratory information system. And these guys, especially Dr. Beltran, said, I don't know what to do with this. How do we do this? And this woman said, well, I'm retiring, so I don't know what you're going to do it, because you're not going to do it with me. And so Alejandro said, well, Jeannette trained in clinical pathology. Why don't we ask her to help us with the implementation of the laboratory information system? You know, we'll pull her out of anatomic pathology, and then she can work with us for, 6 months, 9 months, a year in the lab, and be our, computerize the lab. And they said, okay, do you want to do this? And I said, okay, that sounds like an interesting challenge. So I took that job of doing the laboratory information system. And I guess I did a good job, and I liked the job. And then I ended up becoming the director of the laboratory at the Instituto Nacional de Cancerología. But it all started because they didn't have somebody that did clinical pathology and that could implement the laboratory information system. So it was very fortunate that Rex Kahn had asked me to, why don't you do clinical pathology? Because it eventually ended up being a job for me that I had not even planned or thought about. So I think serendipity, you sometimes don't plan where you're going to end up, and that's where you end up. And I think that's been very important. During that time, this is the information system. It's an Italian system that is translated into Spanish, and that was very useful because a lot of the people in the lab did not speak but Spanish. So the fact that it was translated, it was very important. In the lab, I also implemented flow cytometry. I implemented cytogenetics. And one of the things that I ended up doing a lot is a lot of the techs that worked in the lab had not graduated from their bachelor's degree. And so, because in Mexico, to graduate, you need to do a thesis. And they hadn't done their theses because they had started working and they had started earning money, so they basically decided that they were not going to do the theses. But doing their theses would have increased their pay grade. But they didn't have time. So I said, okay, all the lab techs that are due to have their theses done, we're going to get projects for every single one of them, and we're going to graduate them all. And actually, I ended up graduating 8 techs that were already working in the lab, and some of them even became supervisors in the lab. Once the people in the National Autonomous University and other universities realized that I had projects in my head coming out of everywhere, and that I was graduating people, they started sending more people. So I ended up doing a lot of mentoring of laboratory techs for graduation. So it was a very rewarding experience. One of the other things that I did is I moved the lab. The lab used to be in a very small place, so we ended up moving, especially because I had the flow cytometry, the computers, the cytogenetics. I had increased the amount of tumor markers that we were doing. I had expanded the menu enormously. So we moved the lab from one place. We ended up first in the kitchen because we needed to have Bunsen burners at that time. We still did that, so we needed gas, and that was the only place that had gas. So then we had to move back into the lab once it had been renovated. And this stamp also tells me that one of the reasons why we moved out of Mexico was the hassle of living in Mexico City. 20 million people. You think Atlanta has traffic? You have never driven or gone to Mexico City. That is incredible. At the time, I already had my 2 kids, Vicente and Victoria. Victoria was born in Mexico. Vicente was born here. As I said, I acquired a wife. Her name was Magda. Her name is Magda. And she helped me with the kids, and she helped me with a lot of chores at the house. We really appreciated all the help that she could give us. Then when we came back, I came to CDC. At CDC, I had great opportunities. It was a great job in many ways. I was in the team that investigated the anthrax bioterrorism attack. I was in the team that discovered SARS. We did a lot of work on influenza respiratory diseases. We did a lot of work on emerging infections. This is an example of monkeypox. I actually ended up publishing over 100 articles just based on the different things. I continued working on H. pylori. I continued working a lot on some things regarding AIDS and syphilis. So it was a very rewarding time. But I can tell you one thing, no job is, well, I never missed an opportunity to publish. I like writing, so I kept on writing as much as I could. And there's no perfect job, I would say. One of the things that I was missing is, and you can see my collection stamp on education. Okay. So I was missing because at CDC you don't, you do a lot of policy, you do a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of interesting work. But during the time that I was there were only 3 people that came that were either residents or were like they call them emerging infectious disease interns, and they are there for a year. So the opportunities of doing teaching are very small. And I need to thank Tris, who's here, and Angie, who gave me the opportunity to come to Emory and expand on what I was already doing and do more teaching. What do I do at Emory nowadays? I do a lot of protein work. You know, you can see all the albumin and this to have an M protein. I do coagulation. I do interpretation on coagulation. I do fish for a lot of the cancers, the different translocations or deletions that patients may have in their cancer. And I continue to work at CDC. I'm a guest researcher at CDC, and I continue to hunt microbes. Okay, this is a coccidioidomycosis. So I continue to hunt microbes. And one of the things that has been very rewarding is expanding the education not only to the residents and medical students, but to start doing some education material online, doing education in other countries, which obviously I had already done in Mexico, but expanding it to Africa and other places, and doing something like this page that we have is great. It's a page on microbiology and how to diagnose different organisms. We've expanded that to have other disciplines. So we're right now, we have about 50 modules in the microbiology one, and we've expanded. We're right now about 25 modules in other areas like chemistry. And then we are starting right now with anatomic pathology. So we've moved. And I've been able to also do some publications on teaching. So I think that that's another fun thing. Never miss an opportunity to teach. So some advice I would say, a chart can always be fun. And I cook a lot. I cook with my son. My son loves cooking. So here we have the 2 of us preparing dinner in my parents' house. I always try to find time to relax. I started skiing when I was 30-something years old, and I still go skiing, so it's never late to learn something. And I continue to dance. I continue to dance ballet, but obviously my husband doesn't like dancing ballet, so I haven't seen him yet in Thais, not yet there. But we like to dance, so, you know, keep dancing. And here's my family now, my son and my daughter, and my parents, Enrique and Ursula. Thanks.
questions for Jeannette? Yes, let me bring the mic over to you, Jenny.
Hi, and this is, it's actually a question for either of you. I'm on staff in the Office of Admissions, and so it's very helpful for me to hear your story and understand some of the barriers that you just knocked down to the benefit of the young ladies that we're meeting today. Are you aware of any current issues that we would soon like to see as knocked down as those that you have accomplished? And I think of the first speaker mentioning that she was told flat out, we're not going to hire women. And so I'm sure the attitude is still alive today, maybe not so obvious. So what are some of the ways in which women are still climbing those walls?
Well, I can tell you the story that I had when I was implementing the laboratory information system in Mexico. I still remember so clearly. It was the first government hospital that was having a laboratory information system. So everybody was, their eyes were in the lab. And they asked me to go and present the project to the Minister of Health, who's a man. And I was pregnant, and when I was pregnant, I always looked very, very big. Believe it or not, I guess it's because of the small frame, I don't know, but I was like big, even though I was only about 7 months pregnant or something like that. And he just took a look at me and said, "Are you going to finish the project?" And I was like, I just looked at him and I said, "Who do you think I am?" Quite blankly, what do you think? I'm just going to leave you with the stuff here? I can say that it was very hard to do, but at the same time, I think that he spiked me in such a way that I said, I'm just not going to let this happen. I went back to work. Obviously, I gave birth to my daughter, and I gave birth. I actually gave birth to the computers 2 weeks before I gave birth to my daughter. So we turned on the laboratory information system in January 20th, and my daughter was born February 2nd. I remember receiving calls at the same time that I was giving birth, and I remember Carlos was saying, "Stop it!" Like, and so I went back at 2 weeks after having delivered. It was hard, but at the same time, at that point in time, Victoria was a little thing that just needed, I went part-time during that period of time. She needed to be breastfed and then sleep. And so, it was hard, but, you do it. And I think the fact that people tell you that you can't, at least for me, it's almost like counterproductive. Oh, I will.
These are so different now. And some of the concerns of the men are legitimate. But you've got to look past that bottom line and look at the value that women bring to your practice. But in radiology, it's still a really big deal that there are not a lot of wide open welcoming arms in the private community.
So in short, I think there's still a lot of barriers, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And you just have to realize that, there's some times that you're going to say, no, I'm not going to go there, but sometimes you're going to say, yes, I'll go and I'll do it. So I think that, there's some times that you say, no, I'm not going to touch. And you have to sort of be selective sometimes. I think that comes more with age. As you have traveled more, you can be more selective. But I think, especially at the very beginning, it may be harder to define what is better. And I think that's where mentorship is so important.
It was really important. When I was part-time, I took full-time call. If you're part-time, you just can't be the first person out the door. I mean, that's just my philosophy. You've just got to work a little bit differently because people have taken a risk to let you be part-time. So,
I've got a question for either of you or both of you. What would you say were the biggest obstacles? Was it gender, or in your case, ethnicity or age at the time you were coming through? What were your biggest obstacles, do you think?
Mine was not having money. Mine was money.
Class. Mhm.
Money opens lots of doors. So mine was not having money. It wasn't gender, it was money.
Yeah.
I think in Mexico, I think there's, I think gender is not so much an issue. I think money is a big issue. But gender, we got Supreme Justices in Mexico before the US got Supreme Justices. So, but I think that even though it's a macho country, you, you end up with that. I think here in the States is more gender. I think people are more cognizant of that. In Mexico, I don't, or maybe I was so naive then. It's either of the two.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for either of the women? Yes.
With physicians. So challenges, advice for a woman who is in a situation, like that with two, calls, other things.
Get a wife.
Oh, I would tell you, since you
wives.
said that so many times, at home I've been told we have a wife. What we really miss having is a husband.
That's great.
Yeah, because he travels too much.
I may not be the one to ask because I've been married 3 times. So I may not be the one to ask. There were so many things in Jeanette's presentation that were great. Balance in your life is so critical. Flexibility. Flexibility, like you see, this new opportunity comes up, gosh, it doesn't make sense. I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to do it anyway. That is such a big deal. And I guess marriage is the same way. But I haven't been very successful at it.
I must say that Carlos does help. Even though he's traveling a lot, when he's at home, he helps quite a bit.
You just have to say that because he's here. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank all of you for coming and taking the time out today to come and listen. And I want to thank our 2 honorees for all they've done to contribute to their field and to the school. And we have a token for them. Let me read this to you if I can open it. Yeah. You have a crystal paperweight that says Emory University School of Medicine, Outstanding Women in Medicine, recognizing outstanding professional accomplishments. This one is Jeannette Guarner, MD, 2014. So you are welcome. Thank you. And a beautiful one for you as well. So thank you. Thank you all. And thank you. I'm sure these fine women will stay around for a few minutes if you want to talk to them individually. And please enjoy refreshments.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.